Today we're going to create a to-do list using the JSONPlaceholder API. So for this application, we're going to be building our web application, which is this code over here. And our web application is going to make a request to an API. This API is going to return JSON data that our web application is going to use. Our application will interpret that JSON data and then display it on a page, and we'll have a to-do list. So to help us do this, because we're just building the front end over here, the web application, we're not going to concern ourselves with the back-end API. We don't want to go build that for this little demo. What we're going to be using is something called JSONPlaceholder. So it's a fake RESTful API. REST is a concept for how to make an application programming interface that we're going to be using and consuming here. And for this fake API, what they allow us to do is get different lists of data. One of these lists is posts, comments, albums. These are all fake APIs, and if we click on them, we get JSON over here. And this JSON data we can consume within our application. So the one we're going to be concerned with is to-dos. This to-do list over here is just a bunch of fake data. As you can see, it's an array over here, as we can see with this square bracket over here. So it returns a whole bunch of rows of data. Each record over here is defined within these curly braces, and then within the curly braces, we have the properties for that to do. The two things that we're really concerned with is displaying the title and whether or not it's completed, true or false. Other information that they give us as well is the identifier for that to-do item. So if we were to decide to update the completed status, we would tell the server, hey, we're updating the completed status for item 2 or item 1 or item 3. We also know, based on this data, which user was doing that. It gives us a user ID. And if we want to know who that user is, we can go on over to the user endpoint. And that user endpoint over here will tell us that user 1 is Leanne, or user 2 is Irvin, and just every other user there. So to get started, we need to be able to connect to that API from our application. We're going to be using something called Axios. Axios is an awesome package that we can use to do HTTP requests over the internet. So over here, we go to Axios. It's an npm package. And to install that within our application, we can just open up our terminal over here. And this is just a brand new application that I created using npx create react app. And what I'm going to do over here is do npm install, and I'm going to install Axios. At the same time, I'm also going to install Bootstrap. So we can do a little bit of styling. So we've got Axios and Bootstrap. You just separate them with a space, hit enter, and then npm will go ahead and download those modules for us to use. And those modules will go inside of our node directory over here. So now that we have those modules, we can start using them. So step number 1, let's go ahead and add Bootstrap to our application. Let's also get our application running. So npm start. Then once our application's running, let's go into index.js over here. And inside of index.js, what we're going to do is go ahead and add Bootstrap. So let's import Bootstrap. So to import Bootstrap, we just do import, and then bootstrap /css/bootstrap.min.css, and that'll add Bootstrap to our application. You can see styling already kind of changed over here. Kind of gives you a hint that we've installed Bootstrap. So now that we have Bootstrap installed, let's go ahead and get data from this API. So the URL that we're going to be using to get data from is the to-dos URL over here. And it's going to get us this JSON data. So if we go on over to our app.js, which we already have open, so this file here, in this simple example, we're going to delete everything that's here. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and go to Bootstrap. So if you go to the main Bootstrap application or website over here, And I will just close my developer tools as well because we don't need that. So just close it right there. Put this back and then go to documentation. Let's look up Spinner. So we can get a spinner from Bootstrap. So let's get a spinner over here. We'll get the blue one. Copy that. Over here, I'm just going to add a div with a class name equal to container. And then inside of this div, I'm going to paste the spinner that we just copied. And because that spinner here is written in HTML and we're using JSX, JSX is a name. We need to change the class over here because it's not going to be available. So class name, change that to class name. Go back to our application. And now we have a spinner. There we go. So this is what we're going to have while we're waiting to load data. I'm also just going to convert our app over here to a class component. So I'm going to remove class, put class there, have this extend component, import component by hitting tab. So now we have that. I'm going to cut our return statement over here, add a render method, and inside of that render method, we'll do a return. So there we are. We're in a good state. I just saved that and the application still works. So the next step, when we want to load data from the internet to display here, we want to do that in the component did mount event there. So component did mount. So what's going to happen when our component first loads, it's going to render the HTML. So it's going to show the spinner. And then when the spinner, after the spinner is shown, it's going to stay there. And then the component did mount is going to execute. So we can have the spinner executing while we perform a request to get all those to-do items. For this to work, we're going to, first let me remove this so we don't have any errors from that. And we're going to import Axios from Axios. And Axios is a library that we're going to use to make requests over the internet. The request that we're concerned with is a GET request, which means we're getting information. Just like when you hit a URL, we're doing a GET. So over here, we're going to go axios.get, and the GET method takes in a URL. So we're going to go over here to JSONPlaceholder, copy that URL, paste it in over here. And the syntax that we're going to use to get this information is going to be a let, and then we're going to get back a result. We're going to say it's equal to axios.get, but axios.get returns a promise. And we want the actual result of that promise. So what we have to do is make this an asynchronous request, which means our application will continue to run, and once it gets the information, it'll return to the result. So in order to do that, we're going to add the async keyword over here, and then we can say, hey, to our application, wait over here to get the result. And then once you have the result, we can take that result and update our state of our application. So right now, we don't have any state. So let's create some state for our to-dos. State equals new state is just an empty object, and we'll have a list of to-dos. That to-dos will be an empty array. Once we have that array information, we want to display it on the screen. So for now, let's go on down over here where our spinner is, and we'll just kind of cut this loader over here out. And what we're going to do to display that information, we'll say this.state.todos. And if the length is greater than 0, we'll display our to-dos. So over here, we'll go div/div. And then for now, we could just display the number of to-dos that we have. In order to do that, we need to put that inside the curly braces, and this.state.todos.length We'll display the number of to-dos that we have. And on the other side, if we don't have any to-dos, well, let's show the spinner there. So kind of hard to read. So first part over here is showing the length. If it's true, we're going to show the length of to-dos. Otherwise, we're going to show a spinner on the screen. As it stands right now, we don't have any to-dos. If I want to over here, I'm going to pull up the console and let's take a look at what's happening on our component did mount. So if I say console.log and give it the result object that we get back, we can see that we get an array over here. And this array has 200 items in it. We also get back an HTTP status code that said, hey, everything's good. So this syntax over here, you have to use when you're using Axios.get over here because it's returning a promise. So that this happens synchronous. So this happens one after another. We get the result and then we move on to the next line, which is typically how code works. If you're using function callbacks, this would be a little bit different if you're using your promise. So let me just show you a quick example. So over here, we get our result and then we print the result on the screen. What I could do here is say console.log got the result. And we'll just say this, or we'll say, how about after result? So just as we expect, we get our result and we get our result here and then it says after result. So after result is called there, it's called after this line. Now, contrary, if I were to get rid of async and I get rid of await, this method over here, get, we could also then pass in a function. So we could say get, then do the following. And the following over here that we do, we could give it an anonymous function or we could give it an actual function. And that actual function has the result. And that function over here, we could say console.log and then print out the result. Oh, there's a little error there. So function, oh, how to spell function right. There we are. We got function, we got our result, console.log. Now check this out. The console.log that says after this result is called first, right there, and then we display the data. So over here, if you're looking at the code, it looks like we're supposed to display the data, console.log.result, and then do this. Well, not really. Axios.get over here is being called in the background. In the background, when it finally gets that data from this URL, it'll then call console.log. So it's the code will step over this line and then onto this next line where it actually gets the result. So it steps over here, wait about half a second, and then boom, all of a sudden it gets that result. So that's why we see after result called before that. Instead of using this syntax, the async await is actually a lot cleaner. And it's what you expect. You expect this line to get called, get the result, and then do something with the result. So in our situation over here, where we want to set the state, so we'll say set state, we'll give it a new object with the to-dos. And for now, what we could do is we could call result.data, because if we take a look at the object that we get back, it has a status code, it has headers. All we're really interested in is this data object right here. This is the data that we want. It's an array of data of all the items that are available to us with title, completed, ID, and user ID. So over here, we save that, and then look at that. We get back a 200. That is the number of items in the to-do list right there. So to make this a little bit more useful, what we could do is display these items. In order to do that, we say this.state.todos, and then we could go ahead and map that data. So let's do that. We're going to take in a function over here. We'll call it to do. And then let's see, there we are, to do. And what we want to display is the title and a checkbox to know whether or not it's completed. So in order to do that, let's take a look at Bootstrap. let's go check out a list. So we'll look up list group. And what we're going to use down over here, we're going to copy this HTML so it's a lot quicker for us to do. And with badges. But we're not going to put a badge. We're going to put a checkbox at the end to indicate whether or not the to-do item is complete. So in order to do this, all we need to do is copy the first part. We just need the UL, li, with that information there. And then coming over here to this .state.todos.map, we can go over here into this function here. And inside that map function, paste that JavaScript. That's a bit messy right now. We're going to have to close that UL. And then the class over here, I'm using Command D or Control D to put multiple cursors. Hit write, and then type name so that we get the right syntax. So remember, it has to be class name because JSX can't use the keyword class because it's reserved. We have to use class name. So over here, back to our application, we're displaying the same thing over and over because we're not using this to-do yet that we mapped. So let's go ahead over here, and inside the li, what we want to display, we'll put curly braces right there, and we want to say to-do dot title. Now we have different titles for each and every single one of these items, which is pretty cool. And then over here, instead of showing this badge, we're going to get rid of that class. We don't really need it. And then inside of this span over here, let's go ahead and put an input. And we're going to have, we're going to put the type is equal to checkbox. And close that off. And then we'll say checked is going to be equal to, and what we can do here, we say to do dot, and if we go back to this over here, we can see that there's a property called completed. So we can just copy that name, come back to our code, and let's have that up there. Put the completed in. Now we have checkboxes over here displaying. So these errors over here we can fix. Each child in a list should have a unique key. So the child in our list over here, when we're doing the map over here, so here's a little error. We don't need this UL inside here. This UL over here goes inside our div, and then that UL over here goes over here. So there we are. So now we're only mapping LIs. And inside of that LI over there that we're mapping, that's right. Inside of the LI that we're mapping over there, each LI, we want to give it a key because that's a reserved keyword. And that key, we're going to set to the ID because recall, each to-do list item has a unique identifier. In this situation, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we want to identify each one uniquely, and we have that information to do that. So we can go todo.id. And then this error over here, you must provide a check prop to form field without an on-chain channel. This will render a read-only field. Yeah, so we're okay with that right now. We want our field to be read-only. We're not actually using the UI to change this. We can't change it at the moment. If we wanted to do, if we wanted to do that, we have to handle it through state. For now, we're just using it as a mechanism to show this on the screen to indicate whether or not it's checked, and this seemed like a quick way to do it. So this is pretty good so far. So just to recap this example, what we're doing is when you first load that screen, we're going to show the spinner. Because it's loading so quick, we're not seeing that spinner. If our number of items is equal to 0 or less, then we show a spinner. Otherwise, we do this. To simulate showing a spinner before we call set state over here, if I were to hide set state, because the state never got set, we see the spinner. To simulate that, I can just do a little timeout over here. I can do await, new promise, and this is like a little trick to make our application go to sleep for a few seconds, and then continue carrying on. So this line over here, when we get to it, we're going to make this line of code sit here for about 1 second before the application continues. And we can do that by calling set timeout. And this callback over here, when this X over here occurs, it'll say resume the application. So X, give it 1000. Await new, oh, capital P right there. We're creating a new promise. There we go. And then when we refresh our application, it sits there for a second, shows a spinner, and then we see all the data here, all the to-do items and whether or not they're checked. So the way it works is first the render happens, shows a spinner because we don't have any to-do items. Component did mount, then fires, so the application is responsive for the user because it's showing the spinner. And then once we get the items, we set the state, which signals to React to update the UI. And then when the UI updates, it fires the render method. The render method checks the to-do's length, which is greater than 0 because it's 200, and then goes ahead and creates a list. And then inside that list, we create our list items, and that each list item is mapped from the list of to-dos in our state. And then we display the title of that to-do, and then we also display a checkbox to indicate if it's completed or not. For the next exercise, we could easily create this into its own component, and then each one of these list items could be its own component as well. And the spinner could easily be created into its own components. We'll just do that one real quick over here. We have the loading item over here. If we jump in over here and we just create a new folder and we call it components, and then we could create a component called loading.jsx, and then or actually we could just do import React right there, and then we'll import a stateless function. We'll call it loading, and then loading over here, all we have to do is cut that HTML there, paste it, get rid of our multiple cursors. There we are, paste that. So there we are, we have our loading React component. Come back to our application over here, app.js, type loading, hit tab to auto import it if you have that installed. Loading gets included here at the top of the screen, /components loading. And then we have our loading component. And then you can do the same with this part over here. Make this into another component so that all we really have is just 2 sections over here. One that says loading, and perhaps one that says to do. And then that would be much less code and smaller components. But for now, we don't have that, so I'll just undo that, put that back. We still have our loading component, and we have that.